this module, even though it's called Virtue, Vice and Salvation, that's the formal name of it. It's actually what I call the Judeo-Christian meta-narrative. It encompasses a whole Judeo-Christian story of which we're all part of. It relates to, it's a classical course in understanding the original creation of humanity, the original justice that humanity was placed in, and the consequences of what we call the fall, the very deleterious consequences upon humanity, and how we emerge out of that, how we are rescued out of that. And that's principally by God through Christ, the grace of Christ, and how we are called to a new life in Christ. And that's, of course, the virtue part. And that life is our journey leading to the salvation part. So we have a look at the end, in our third session today, at what we call the four last things, eschatology, the last things. And we'll look at those four parts as well. So there's a lot of subsections to this, and I followed very tightly the actual course outline. And so we'll start with having a look at the natural law. This is all classical Catholic theology and philosophy here. The natural law is very simple. It's do good and avoid evil. If you look at the original creation account of humanity, there's no hordes of law books on shelves. I used to work in that industry, and there's thousands and tens of thousands of human-made laws. But all those really grow out of this fundamental law, which is to do good and avoid evil. And where do we find this law written? We don't find it on stone tablets or in case books or law judgments. It's not written down, it's written in our hearts. That's where we find it. It's instinctively inbuilt in us. It's our intellect that understands that. And it's our will that determines to live that out. The Ten Commandments are actually a written rendering of the natural law. Do good and avoid evil means loving God above all things and loving your neighbour as yourself. And the reason why the Ten Commandments were inscribed upon two tablets is because those two tablets designated on the first hand the love of God, and on the second tablet, the second hand, the love of neighbour. So if we have a look at the Ten Commandments, 3 were on the first tablet, they related to God, 7 on the second tablet relating to neighbour. And we can summarise these Ten Commandments even more simply with St. Paul saying love is the fulfilling of the law. So if we want to prescribe to people how we should live, we can go into it in many fine details. But really, the Christian life at its core is a positive life of doing good, of loving. Because when we look at the Ten Commandments and how they're written, there's a lot of don't do, do not, do not, do not. Some negative prescriptions. But essentially, St. Paul got it right and understood it rightly. That we fulfill all those 10 commandments if we simply love orderly. And we'll see later on again that Christ came to teach us how to reorder our love. We'll look at the Beatitudes in more detail later, but I look at the Beatitudes as basically like sharpening the pencil. You know, the natural law became obscure to us because of the original sin that impacts on our intellect, our understanding, and on our will. So we have them written down for us to know. And if we live out the Ten Commandments, we live a good life. But Christ gives us the Beatitudes to raise us to the next level. So that it's an interior purification and perfection of every aspect of our being. When we love and we fulfill the will of God for us, this is what guarantees happiness in this world and salvation the next. So the road to salvation is the road of love. And it's not just happiness in the next life, it's also happiness in this life. Now, the next section talks about contemporary understandings of the good life. And of course, the Church, the Catholic faith, lives in the contemporary world, as it always has done. Things were easier in previous centuries, when Christianity actually, from the end of the Roman era, from the post-Constantinian era onwards, began to mould society according to Christian principles. We live in an age now where that is no longer the case. And so we have many challenges. Our young people are living in a world that does not encourage them to live positively according to Christian principles. And that's our challenge as teachers. The prevailing mentality in today's society is basically the same as it was at the time when St. Paul wrote these words to the Corinthians. The world of our purpose, for many people, is just to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Life is just about the now. Life is just about pleasure. Life is just about me. And it's not about tomorrow, it's about the now. My pleasure in the now. And who cares about the tomorrow? Even if there is a tomorrow, even if there is an afterlife, we don't necessarily worry about that. This is not just a throwaway line. This actually reflects a particular philosophical school that operated in ancient Greece at these times, and that was a school of hedonism. It's a philosophy that life is for pleasure. And in our contemporary culture, we see it expressed in the following maxims, as you see it on the screen. Just do it. You only live once. I want it all and I want it now. So just do it means there's no rules. There's no commandments. You only live once means there's only this life. There's no afterlife to worry about. And I want it all and I want it now. It's just about materialism and my own individualism. Me. It's about me and what I want, and it's material things in this life now. So our culture today predominantly promotes the personal pursuit of pleasure, power and material gain in this world. And I think basically all the stats are telling us, all the surveys are telling us that is the prime motivation of most people today. And all our maxims and slogans encourage this. The prevailing culture has changed, and these are the primary movers today in our world. When I say contemporary culture, I'm really probably just focusing on the last 50 to 60 years. The sexual revolution is a profoundly deep revolution that is altering every aspect of our civilization. Every way we look at life and relationships and family, marriage, family, children, culture. And again, the sexual revolution, if I was to talk just on this in depth, I would say that the sexual revolution is that revolution which, more than any other, is in antagonism to what I call the Jesus revolution of 2,000 years ago. The sexual revolution is, I don't want to get polemical here, but it's not taking us forward, it's taking us backwards. It's taken us to where we were in the Greco-Roman world before the planting of Christianity and its growth and its transformation of that Greco-Roman world. The difference between the 21st century and the first century is not necessarily the sexual revolution as such, because we're reverting to those norms and those behaviours of the first century. It's just that we do it better now, with better science, medicine and technology. Secularism is that movement in the world that wishes to push God and religion into the private realm only. It's not to be in the public realm. It's not to influence society. It's not to influence culture. It's not to influence our laws. If you want to be religious, that's fine. Keep it to yourself in the private realm only. And we praise and thank people who don't wear it on their sleeves. And the New Atheism, I don't know if any of you read any of the literature of the New Atheism, or who the New Atheists are, or the so-called four horsemen of the non-apocalypse. If you've heard of people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris, if you read any of their literature, I assure you it's not user-friendly literature for religion. And their polemic, their rhetoric is that religion is a disease. It's a virus. It corrupts and it poisons and it destroys everything. Has no contribution whatsoever for society, and it needs to be eradicated from the world. And people like Hitchens and Harris, if they had political power, would put that into effect. Dawkins is more moderate in the sense that he believes still in people's right to be religious, even though he thinks religion is a virus. It's a form of illness. And to raise your children in religion is a form of child abuse. This is not my language. This is the language of the New Atheism. And why we need to know this is because our surveys are showing us that each successive generation, including those kids in our schools, more and more of them are becoming agnostic and atheists before they leave school. So if 9% in our surveys, our own meta surveys done within our own R&E directorate since 2014 shows that there's about 9 to 10% of students in Year 7 who call themselves agnostic or atheists. And by the time they get to Year 12, that's nearly 30%. So it's a reality in our schools. And some of our students are reading the literature of the New Atheism. Not the old atheism. The old atheism had a certain politeness about it, a respect. It was philosophically based, not necessarily politically or polemically using the language of insult and abuse, which is the norm for New Atheism. The challenges of the Judeo-Christian concept of the good life today, we've already touched on these. I'll just go over them again as a summary. Hedonism as a philosophy. People are hedonists today without even knowing what that word is, what that word means. Materialist is the norm. Post-Modernism is a new term I haven't mentioned yet. Post-Modernism, I mean, these terms are rather overwhelming at first. What do these words mean? Post-Modernism. I first heard about postmodernism maybe about 17, 18 years ago, and I thought, there's another bit of jargon. But postmodernism principally is, modernism is rationality. I'll only believe what I can know, what I can see, what I can test, what I can have empirical evidence for. That's rationalism. I don't take anything on faith. I don't believe in anything unless you can prove it to me. That's rationalism, that's modernism. Postmodernism is, there is no truth. Doesn't exist. There's no absolute truth. There's no absolute morals. And even if there was a truth, we don't have the ability to know it, to realise it. And postmodernism is working hand in hand with New Atheism. As New Atheism grows, and New Atheism posits the view out there that there's no morality, there's no laws, the universe is just brutally cold. The evolutionary theory, atheistic evolutionary theory, dictates all the laws of the universe and life and existence. You know, survival of the fittest, etc., etc. The universe is cold and harsh and brutal, and it has no meaning. If the universe has no meaning, then there's no truth. What did original goodness look like, and how was it disrupted by the fall? So we begin our meta-narrative now. What did the beginning look like? The good of creation and humanity as imago Dei. It's always been the Catholic tradition that creation is inherently good. And we don't necessarily realise that that's always been the case in Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, but not necessarily with other religions and cultures in the ancient world. When the Jews were in captivity in Babylon, in the 6th century BC, scholars tell us that that's when the first creation account was actually drafted and inserted into the book of Genesis. It wasn't in the original version of Genesis. And it was drafted and inserted. It was the second written, but now first appearing in Genesis, to oppose what was called the Eastern Manichaean or Gnostic viewpoint, that creation is evil, the material world is evil. And the universe is divided between the material and the spiritual. And the material is created by the evil principle, and it's our duty, we are duty bound as spirits in bodies to escape from the material. That's salvation according to Gnosticism. Through knowledge we escape from the material to the spiritual. The good God created the spiritual realm. But Christianity challenged that. Christianity said that everything is good, all creation is good, the material and the spiritual. And that's why you get that poetic sequence in Genesis 1, the creation account, of the three realms being created, and in the next 3 days, those three realms being populated. Because all creation, material and spiritual in the Judeo-Christian tradition is inherently good. And all creation is in the likeness of God and reflects God in his infinite perfections in one way or another. And you see that I've got on the screen the mineral, the vegetative, the sensitive, the human, the angelic. They're the 5 realms of creation, and all those realms are good. Mineral is just like rocks and dirt. They don't have life. There's creation but no life. Vegetative is plants. They can nourish, unlike mineral, they can nourish, grow and reproduce. And the sensitive is animal life. In addition to those other beings in existence, animals have locomotion, they can move, they have external senses, hearing, sight, taste, touch, etc., smell. And they have internal senses, memory, imagination, estimative sense, what we call common sense, and unifying sense, an ability in their organic brain to process all the information they receive through their 5 senses. And humans have all that, and then go to the next level. We have intellect and will. So all that information we receive through our 5 senses is true information. And it goes as images into our imagination in our brain. And our intellect is a spiritual power that processes those images and conceptualizes them, understands them in their essence so we can relate what they are. So I'll give you a test now. If there's a red Lamborghini on the floor here right now in front of me, you could see that with your eyes. And then when you shut your eyes, you'll have in your memory, in your imagination, an image of red Lamborghini. Then you leave this building, you go somewhere else, far away from that red Lamborghini, and I then talk to you about red Lamborghini back at your school, and then you're dealing with it at a different level, at an intellectual level. You don't just know it as one red Lamborghini in front of you, as a dog would or a cat would, but you understand it as a concept. You don't need to see it anymore to understand what red Lamborghini is in its essence. And that's how we as human beings are at the next level of creation above sensitive life. And then we have the angelic realm, which is the next level of life, superior to us as human beings, pure spiritual life. Pure intellect, pure will. When I say will, I mean freedom. Intellect, your power to understand, to know, to judge. Will, to love or hate, according to what you know. So we'll go into that again in a bit more detail. I already mentioned about the Christian view of creation against the Gnostic view. For us, simply take away, all creation is good. That's why, I should mention this, when we say the creed, whether it's the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, we open with the most common sense words. We don't realise how significant they were when they were written in the 2nd and the 4th centuries AD. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. That is an apologetical statement against the Gnosticism of its time. There's one God, not two. Creator of all things material and spiritual. Visible and invisible. All creation's good. There's no two gods fighting for supremacy in the universe. And we are in the image of God. Human beings, all creatures are in the likeness of God. That table you are sitting at is in the likeness of God. It is a being that has perfections, and each one of those perfections reflect God in one or more of his infinite perfections. But you are of a higher order. You are in the image and likeness of God. Because what makes you in the image of God is your ability to know, understand, judge, love, and hate. Hate's not a nice word, is it? Okay? But there's some things we don't like and have good reason not to like. Those powers of intellect and will are spiritual powers based in your soul, and they make you, more than anything else, more than any other part of your being, reflect God. God is infinite intellect and infinite will, infinite knowledge and infinite love. We're going to have a look at the natural, supernatural, preternatural gifts later on. But I'll give you one example of each. A natural gift you have your body, your intellect, your will, they're natural. Supernatural is sanctifying grace that elevates you to give you a participation in God's own life. How God lives in you. And preternatural are other gifts that perfected us on earth in creation to help us live lives on earth in a perfectly happy mode. So super means above. I'm given a gift that elevates me above my nature, and preternatural is a Greek word meaning beyond. So they were gifts that enabled me to live on earth perfectly happily beyond my natural self. So we go to the Genesis account about where humanity was originally placed, and we mean the threefold original harmony. Everything in paradise was in unison, in harmony, in peace. The first, God and humanity. God talked with us, God walked with us. We were his creatures, we were his children, we were his friends. There was that relationship that was everyday, common, where we would speak to God on a daily basis as a friend, as a father. There was unity and peace within the human family. Between our original parents, not domination, not lust, not oppression, partnership and friendship in perpetual love and cooperation. And there was harmony between humanity and creation itself. And placed in that paradise, and which was, according to the Genesis data, is anthropological. That is, it was limited in size only where humanity was. Outside of that realm, it wasn't paradise. But within that paradise, there was human dominion over nature, and nature was in harmony with humanity, so that nature itself was not in rebellion and could not harm humanity. And within humanity itself, within the human person, there was a harmony. So when our reason was in obedience, loving obedience to God, then all our lower powers, passions, appetites, emotions and desires, were in obedience to reason. So within ourselves there was a harmony, there was a peace. There wasn't this tension that we read in St. Paul's letters, the tension between the spirit and the flesh. What we call temptation from within us. We know what's right, but it's difficult to do what's right. Why? We have this urge within us that tempts us in another direction. That didn't exist in the original justice, in the original harmony that existed within the human person. And why was this the case? Supernatural gift we had was God living in our souls. The Trinity lived in us. Jesus spoke about that later on in these terms, because this is what he came to restore. If you love me, my Father will love you, and we will come and make our home in you. That's the supernatural life. It's a life of sanctifying grace. The grace that makes us, quote, holy, in union with God. The preternatural gift were these. There were 4 preternatural gifts. Each one of them started with the same letter I. The first one was infused knowledge. Original humanity, original parents had all the knowledge they needed to understand the created universe around them. It was infused. Then they had the gift of integrity. Infused knowledge, integrity. Integrity was that gift that enabled humanity to have that interior peace and harmony I spoke about a few moments ago. There was no tension between the spirit and the flesh. Integrity meant that the human person was spiritualized, and that the body and all its appetites, which were good, desires, emotions were all regulated according to reason. The body was spiritualized, that's integrity. And in harmony, internal harmony. Then the other gift of impassibility, these technical words. Impassibility means freedom from pain, sickness and suffering. And immortality, freedom from decrepitude and death. So these gifts were given by God to humanity in its original state to perfect humanity in happiness on earth. If you're thinking ahead of me, you're thinking that man and woman would not die. That's correct. The destiny of humanity in this picture was not departure from paradise through death, but departure from this world of grace to the next world of glory through assumption, what we call translation. That you are, when you reach a certain moment of grace and merit in the eyes of God, you are translated from this realm of grace to the next realm of glory, body and soul, without pain, sickness, suffering, without decrepitude or death. And if you connect that with what dogma we have, it's the dogma of the Mary's assumption into heaven. The Mary's assumption into heaven is a restoration of what the original plan was for all of humanity. That we would leave this world, we would live in this world in grace, in friendship, in holiness with God, and we would depart from this world without pain, sickness, suffering, decrepitude or death. That was the original picture. So the life of grace in this world, the life in paradise, was a prelude to the life of glory. It was a period of loving, living in probation for the life of glory. And the law in paradise, as I said earlier when we began, what was the law in paradise? There was only one natural law. Love God above all things and your neighbour as yourself. That was the only law, natural law, which in effect was an outgrowth of do good and avoid evil. Do good and avoid evil. Love God with all your mind, body, heart and soul, and your neighbour as yourself. And if you understand that was the natural law in the garden, then you understand why Jesus later on comes and teaches us when someone asks him, Lord, what must I do to have eternal life? He answers by obey the commandments, which is love God with all your mind, body, heart and soul, and your neighbour as yourself. Because Christ came to restore what the original plan was and reorder our love. And the only positive law, what's a positive law? Not a law based on nature, but a based on will. So, a natural law is drive carefully, because you hurt others if you don't. Positive law is drive 60 kilometres an hour in this zone. Who made that law up? The local council, based on the will of the council. Now, later on, they might change their mind, this council, and say, no, this zone now is 50 k's. Positive laws can be changed depending on the circumstances. They're based on the will of the legislator. But natural laws can never change because they're based on natures. And since natures don't change, natural laws don't change. So the life on earth in paradise was meant to be a life of probation, a period of testing, but really that's rather negative to say that. It's a period of positive love, positive living, and if we affected that life appropriately, we will be then translated into the life of glory. And the life of glory was the ultimate end of humanity, and it was permanent, eternal. Okay? So you've got an idea of the original plan. The gift of free will. Well, look, to sum it up, because I notice I'm rather pushed for time, and I know I will be for the whole day, and I'm already way behind, but we'll do what we can. Your will is there's a debate as to what's your highest faculty, your intellect or your will. I rather think it's a hair-splitting exercise, but your will, and each one of you has a will. Your will is given to you. It's your power to love. Yeah, okay, it's my power of freedom. It's my power to choose this or that. But effectively, you choose according to what you love. You choose what you know is the good. Your intellect tells you what is the good. and you understand it to be the good, and it's your will as the appetite of the intellect that determines what I want. And if your will is operating rightly, it will choose the good, the known good. This is the school of moderate realism here. This is the school of the philosophical school, the anthropological school of St. Thomas Aquinas, understanding the human person. We've got 5 senses. Our senses know things as they are. You're hearing me. You're seeing me. You feel this room is too cold. Okay? Okay? You're touching the table. All this information you're receiving through your senses is real, is correct. Your senses are trustworthy. There are dozens of new philosophies that will tell you something different. And there's those philosophies that are leading humanity into utter confusion. I met someone at university chaplaincy once who said, I am a particular skeptic. I forget the term exactly, but according to him, we cannot know anything for certain. Brilliant boy, brilliant guy. 3 years later, I bumped into him again. He was coming to graduate. And he came out of the car, out at Redfern there. He came out with an old woman. And I saw him and I said, hello, how are you? How's things going? And he shook my hand and said, what's going on today? He said, I'm graduating. And I said, who's this lady with you? He said, that's my mother. I whispered into his ear, are you sure that's your mother? Because 3 years ago you told me we could not know anything with certainty. And he just looked at me. This intelligent guy just realised that his whole philosophy is nonsense. It's not realism. The Catholic philosophy is the school of moderate realism of St. Thomas Aquinas. Your senses are picking up data which is correct. That data goes into your imagination, an organic power of your brain. Your intellect processes that and understands it conceptually. So understands the information in its essence, what it is. And then your will determines whether you like it or not. That's how the human person operates. We can use and misuse our will because it's free. My will is given to me to love the good and to love the ultimate and infinite good, which is God. But because it's free not to love. And it's free to love not so good things, or not to love God. That's the nature of freedom. The original test was to test humanity, so that humanity would show gratitude and love to the God who created all. Everything humanity had in paradise was gift. And humanity was already destined to live happily in this paradise on earth, and even more happily in the glory of the next life. But humanity, because it could understand and love, God wanted that humanity, that same humanity, to show gratitude and give thanks and acknowledge the Creator for all these gifts. So the test we read about in Genesis, well, it was not some frivolous test about an apple from a tree. It was a test for humanity to show the gratitude and love it ought to show. And it failed in that test. And we call that the fall. And the fall was a disobedience based on a lie, which ignited pride, which ignited the disobedience, which ignited the loss of all good things that humanity had. The fall was with full knowledge and consent, because humanity knew God's law, knew the natural law, knew the positive law, don't eat the fruit of that tree of knowledge of good and evil, for in that day you will die the death. It had allowed itself to be deceived, and it fell, but the difference between humans and the angels is that the humans repented. They had been deceived, yes, they were at fault, yes, but they repented. And because of that repentance, God was willing to rescue humanity. Unlike the fallen angels, who not only fell, but have no desire for salvation. They fixed their end. They fell with a deliberation a deliberate decision to revolt, and they fixed that revolt forever. While humanity did not do it in the same manner. Humanity deliberately offended, but then realised it had been deceived, and then repented, and therefore God, in his grace, in his mercy, unmerited, freely chose, even though we strictly didn't deserve it, he chose to rescue humanity. And that's the next part of this meta-narrative, this story. God's grace, freely choosing out of love to rescue humanity, and that grace is summed up in a person called Jesus Christ. The fall meant estrangement from God, disruption in human relationships, disharmony with nature. All that beautiful picture I painted earlier is now in ruin. Humanity will be thrown out of paradise. I'll finish on this slide here. Good, I'm on track now again. Janina, I'll finish on this slide so we won't eat up into the next section. All right? These are the terrible and comprehensive consequences of the fall. Original sin and human brokenness, the new human condition. God left us. The life he departed from our souls. That's the loss of sanctifying grace. We lost the four eyes, the preternatural gifts. We lost infused knowledge, so we would have ignorance in the intellect. Integrity, tension, the domination now of the flesh over the spirit rather than the spirit over the flesh. Impassibility, we are now subject to pain, sickness and suffering. Immortality, we are now subject to decrepitude and death. We have ignorance in the intellect. I can't remember everything. If you didn't have intellect in the intellect, you could sit down now, hear everything I'm saying and never forget it. But because of the wound in the intellect of ignorance, we suffer from memory loss. We can't remember things. We can't understand things so easily. We need more time, and even if we do get it, we'll eventually forget it. Things like that. Malice in the will. Malice means disordered love. I love myself above all things. I don't love God above all things. I don't love my neighbour as myself. I love myself above all things. Disorder in the appetites for pleasure, and weakness in our appetites to do difficult things, in our power to do difficult things. The spirit now is dominated by the flesh. We see the rest of it. I've said all that, decrepitude, death. You see, when St. Paul says the wages of sin is death, is because we lost these gifts. And we're now subject to nature. We now will die. It wasn't part of God's original plan. We're expelled from paradise. We're now to earn our keep by the sweat of our brow, the law of labour. And the worst thing of all, because we lost sanctifying grace, we're excluded from the vision of God in heaven, even those who are repentant, because we need sanctifying grace to behold God face to face. Last example. See this light right in front of me? If I look at it, it blinds me. I can't be in its presence naturally, easily. So how can I be in the presence of the infinite, eternal God, who's overwhelmingly more powerful than any light? I need a heaven suit. What's the heaven suit? It's sanctifying grace. It gives me the ability, the nature, the elevated nature, to be in the presence of God. With the loss of that, I can't be in heaven. These are all the consequences of sin. This is called the bad news. Bad news, sin and its consequences. The next section is the good news, which we call the gospel. And we'll finish there. Thank you.